Putin and Trump may make any deal they want, but they will have zero instruments to enforce it. The key to peace is not in Washington, it's in Europe. I think we are deadlocked.
And what is next?
War.
Let's start with the latest developments. Hungary held recently elections, and opposition leader Peter Magyar secured a landslide victory, bringing Viktor Orbán's 16-year rule to an end. What does Magyar's victory mean for Ukraine and its relations with Budapest?
Well, I believe the biggest difference between Mr. Orbán and Mr. Magyar is that the first one liked demonizing Ukraine, while the new leader of Hungary is not prone to doing that. Otherwise, I think both of them are hard negotiators, and Ukraine will have to be very engaged, but it should not expect an easy ride in relations with Hungary. So in a nutshell, the new reality is much better than the previous one. It gives chances for fair deals. But it's not. I do not expect a radical U-turn in Budapest stance towards the most critical issue for Ukraine, which is EU accession. When it comes to unlocking the 90 billions of EU loan to Ukraine, that I believe is going to be unlocked very soon. It's a good news. But the second vital issue, the accession, will require a lot of effort.
And with Orbán now out of power, how do you think this will affect Russia's ability to influence the EU and its decision from inside?
Well, first, Viktor Orbán was the front runner, but not the sole sympathizer of Russia in the EU. And we shouldn't put all the blames on him. There are still politicians, let's take Prime Minister of Belgium, for example, who would be happy to seek a different quality of relationship with Russia, let me put it this way, at the expense of Ukraine. There is nothing bad in seeking a better relationship, but it's very bad to do that at the expense of Ukraine. So the good news, I think, is that those who preferred to stay behind Viktor Orbán's back and support him in attacking the European Union, not exclusively on the Ukraine issue, but on a broader agenda, have gotten weaker. And Prime Minister Fico, I think, will be much more constructive now. And Prime Minister Babiš of the Czech Republic will be more engaging and constructive as well. And so will others. And secondly, I think it is crucial that the anti-European forces in Europe have suffered a landslide loss, defeat in Hungary. It was not only the regime of Viktor Orbán that was defeated. If he had won, far right or radicalized anti-European political forces across Europe would have been more inspired to attack their governments, their political elites. Now, I think current European elites can feel relieved, at least temporarily, from that pressure.
Let's move on to the no less consequential events in the Middle East. How do you think this recent escalation can affect the balance of power on the geopolitical level?
Well, Europe has better chances to pull itself together now. There will be less internal problems Europe will have to address, because it will be easier to build consensus also on foreign policy issues. And therefore, I think the defeat of Viktor Orbán is a good development for EU stance in the world. It doesn't heal all the wounds, but it makes the overall environment much healthier. Otherwise, I do not really see a kind of a big role that Europe can play in the Middle East today. I would not expect that Donald Trump will withdraw from NATO. I think Middle East will largely remain a US-Israeli story on one side and Iran on the other side, with Gulf countries also, of course, playing a role in it. But Europe will not get involved, nor Europe's the recent outcome of elections in Hungary will play a major role in kind of defining the dynamics in the Middle East.
And speaking of Ukraine in this topic, why do you think Trump rejected Ukraine's proposal to help in the Gulf? And why do you think he did so? And why, despite previous accusations of not being grateful, he still this move still did not change the way Trump sees Ukraine?
I don't think I don't think Trump will dramatically change his stance on Ukraine, whatever we do. It can get better, it can get worse, but you cannot change a person like him and make him adopt a completely different view of the world and leaders in the world. The Ukraine relationship has to be divided into two tracks. The first one is the practical cooperation between our military and the American military, and I think there is a certain level of engagement on the issues which are of interest to both, let's say, Pentagon and Ukraine's Ministry of Defense. But also there is a second political track, which is, let's say, Trump-Zelensky. And Trump rejected Zelensky's offer for a very simple reason. He doesn't want to owe anything to Ukraine because he has a different plan. And, if you owe something to someone, it means you have to pay back. And he doesn't want to constrain himself with that kind of commitment. And secondly, I think Trump would even consider it as a humiliation to admit that he cannot fix Iran without Ukraine's support. So there is also an issue of ego that plays a role here.
And you said that Trump has another plan. What plan do you mean?
No, I believe his line is clear and very consistent. He wants to find the way to press Ukraine into concession in the form of Ukraine's withdrawal from the rest of the Donbas, of the Donetsk region that Ukraine controls, as a way to establish a ceasefire in Ukraine. And he will continue pushing for this particular scenario.
And we will speak about current state of peace talks a bit later in details. And how do you think, why does the US appear to align with Russia in these peace negotiations and demand concessions only from Ukraine, not Russia?
Well, I think we are facing a great power thinking here. So Trump represents a superpower, and he considers Russia as a great power. And in his view, smaller nations should subjugate themselves to the will of stronger nations. So in Trump's world, Ukraine opposing Russian demands is equals to Venezuela opposing American demands. Can he allow that to happen? Clearly not. So he just understands how Putin thinks, and he sees the world from exactly the same perspective as President Putin does. If you listen to the official comments, even the most recent one coming from Vice President Vance, he said that he didn't understand why the Ukraine and Russia were fighting over square kilometers of land. That's just how they think. The American diplomacy always prefers a bad deal to no deal. That's kind of their line of thinking. And in their view, this war really doesn't make sense, and they don't want to see it from the Ukraine's perspective. They see it from their own point of view.
And despite Trump's rejection, Ukraine is now building relationships and sharing its expertise with a number of Gulf countries on its own. What is your opinion on this? What's your take on this growing engagement in the Gulf? And do you see any risks?
President Zelensky played this card wisely, and most importantly, in a very rapid fashion. So his reaction was quick, swift, I would say, and I think he has won that particular battle. How strategic that relationship with several Gulf countries will eventually be, that's a question that remains to be open. But we made an offer. The offer was accepted. It's not just a brick in the relationship. I think it's like a good dozen of bricks investment in these relationships. But again, in diplomacy is always a long play. It's always about long play. You cannot build a relationship in one day. So it depends on how consistent our cooperation with Gulf countries will be. The start was good. I would even say excellent. Let's hope that it will stay that way.
With Iran taking the global focus from Ukraine, it's now more important than ever to support independent journalism. The Kyiv Independent is powered by its readers and viewers, and due to your support, we're able to bring you voices like Dmytro Kuleba. If this work matters to you, please consider becoming our member. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And previously you said that Trump lost the war in Iran. Do you think that he might try to recover from that by pushing Ukraine to the peace deal with Russia?
Yes, I think President Trump will be looking for foreign policy wins in the coming months ahead of the midterm elections. And when I turn my head around, I see only two places on the map where he may try to do it, which is Cuba and us. So I think he will make an attempt, but it depends. It depends. I don't think he's going to succeed. Okay, let's. I don't have to be a diplomat here. I don't think he's going to succeed, but we will have some more turbulent meetings, calls, posts on Truth social media, and moves from Washington.
And you mentioned Cuba. How do you think what might happen there?
No, I'm not. I'm not a wizard, but to say how the goal will be achieved. But Cuba is extremely vulnerable, and I know what he will try to achieve. He will try to topple the regime on the island, as he did in Iran. But the most obvious way would be a blockade. But on the other hand, we saw that he allowed Russian vessels to make it to Cuba and bring some oil to relieve the energy crisis. Let's see how they handle it. So I know the goal, but I do not know how specifically he is going to do that.
And it's been almost a year since Ukraine and Russia, with the US negotiations, started holding a number of rounds of peace talks. And yet the progress mainly have been limited to the prisoner exchanges. In your opinion, do these negotiations hold any real value? And do you expect any meaningful progress in the near future?
Well, prisoner swap is a value in itself, and it's worth any kind of negotiations, meetings, or calls. However, we also have to admit that before these talks started, Ukraine and Russia had conducted prisoner swaps on a regular basis, and we did not need this kind of cover-up of talks to see that process going. Prisoner exchanges is something that both sides are interested in, and therefore I do not think that they cannot exist without peace talks. Having said this, I believe these negotiations have delivered two important outcomes. The first one is a clarity on where the United States stand on security guarantees, the so-called security guarantees. And the second, I believe, is a clearer understanding in both Kyiv and Moscow on what is possible and impossible for both sides to do. So do these negotiations make sense? Yes. Are they bringing us closer to a ceasefire? I'm afraid we're not there yet.
What would happen if the US were to abandon Ukraine, stop all diplomatic talks, stop sharing its intelligence support? Would Ukraine be able to continue to fight in this case?
It will have to. Well, I don't think the United States will abandon Ukraine. Okay, this is what Trump cannot afford is making a move that will allow everyone to blame him for the skyrocketing death toll in Ukraine and the massive destruction of civilian infrastructure. That's not what he's looking for, especially ahead of the midterm elections. That is the blame he wants to avoid. So I do not think he's going to abandon Ukraine, not because he likes us or because he's not willing to do so, but because he cannot afford that politically. However, it is true that the only two major leverages he has on Ukraine are intelligence sharing and interceptors. I think intelligence sharing is less critical, but interceptors is a big deal. The question that I have is whether we will be receiving whether the United States will be selling any interceptors to Europeans so that they could be delivered to Ukraine in the coming months. Because if they don't, of course, our airspace will be exposed and our civilian infrastructure will be exposed to Russian attacks. So that's a real thing. On intelligence, I think it will be damaging, but we can live with that. On interceptors, it will be severely damaging, and we will have to live with that.
And now Russia continue to push for Ukraine to pull out of Donbass. The US also wants Ukraine to withdraw from Donbass before the security guarantees are in place. And for Ukraine, this is unacceptable for many reasons. So do you see any way forward from the question on territorial issues?
No, I think we are deadlocked, both.
And what is next?
War.
Previously, you said that Ukraine has enough resources to continue the war, but not enough to change the trajectory of the war.
Yes, I continue to believe so.
And why do you think so? And what Ukraine need to change this trajectory? And is this even possible?
I don't see that coming in the foreseeable future. I think Russia will continue to have resources to wage a war at the current scale, but it will not be able to break through. I will take the risk by saying that there will be no major developments on the battlefield until the end of the year. I expect major developments in the air, not on the ground. And basically, it has been said many times before by far more competent military speakers than I am, but basically we are in a situation when both Russia and Ukraine have enough of resources to sustain the current trajectory of the war, seen from both perspectives, but none of us can actually change it.
And President Zelensky consistently said that to resolve the territorial issues, there should be the involvement from President Vladimir Putin. And why do you think Ukraine is seeking this meeting? And can it bring any results?
Oh, Zelensky has been very consistent on that. Since day one of the war, he was urging Putin to have to hold a summit. And as far as I understand the president, I think the logic behind this is very clear. He believes that Putin is the only one who can make a decision. Therefore, you have to talk to the decision maker, not to those who report to the decision maker. And that's what he's willing to achieve. But I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon.
But one day this might happen.
One day everything is possible.
And what can persuade Putin to stop the war against Ukraine or to bring him to the negotiating table?
Stalemate on the front line and suffocating Russian economy. And I think as we speak, I believe the chances of a relative stalemate on the front line are more likely than seeing Russian economy suffocate as an outcome of the surging oil prices resulting from the war in Iran.
Russia and the US are reportedly negotiating an economic deal, and this process is led by Putin's envoy Kirill Dmitriev. Also, the US recently lifted oil sanctions on Russia, which are yet to be reimposed. And could both the US and Europe eventually return to business as usual with Russia in the near future?
No, in the near future, that is not going to happen. It is far easier to lift sanctions, some targeted sanctions against Russian companies, than to make a broad economic deal with Russia. So I do not believe that we are going to witness a big business deal between Russia and the United States anytime soon. They will negotiate. I mean, Dmitriev is very good at selling trillions of billions of projects, wars projects. Witkoff is an excellent buyer, but that is still not enough for the deal to happen. I don't think it's going to take place.
And do you think that the US and Russia could reach an agreement that undermines Ukraine's interest behind Ukraine's back?
Well, they can, but none of them have leverages to enforce that deal as long as Ukraine continues to address its weaknesses. And secondly, as long as Ukraine and Europe stand together. The key to peace is not in Washington, it's in Europe and in Kyiv. As long as we are strong and together, Putin and Trump may make any deal they want, but they will have zero instruments to enforce it.
And speaking of domestic politics, in recent interview said that Ukraine needs election. And why do you think so? And do you disagree with the risks everyone is talking about that the elections cannot take place until the ceasefire is in place?
My view is very simple. First, the risks of not holding elections are much higher than the risks of holding elections. So I'm not trying to say that holding elections in the course of the war is an easy ride. It's something that you can do. Of course, it's associated with numerous risks. But as a country, we have to remain vibrant. We have to reinforce our governance. And to get there, we need a new parliament. You've seen recently, the choice is between having a paralyzed parliament in the middle of the war or having elections. This is the choice we're making. Secondly, those who say that we should wait until the war is over for elections to take place, I fully agree with them. But I have one simple question. what if the war lasts 4 more years? Which I hate to presume. I want it to be over today, not even tomorrow. But it's been 4 years. And what if there are 4 more years of war ahead of us? Are we going to avoid making our choices? For how long? And what should happen for you, for everyone to understand that incapable parliament, and I respect these people, they did a lot of good things, but every institution has its resource. So what makes you believe that we will have efficient system of governance for the next 4 years if we do not make changes? The standing parliament in Ukraine was elected in 2019, and it represented the Ukrainian society as it was in 2019. A lot has changed since then. And if you look at the polls, you see Ukrainians expressing their wish to see a different composition of the parliament. They want to see more militaries, more volunteers in it. So for Ukraine to be effective as a democracy at war, we need to make sure that the people present in the parliament represent the society as it stands in this particular moment of history. That they are willing to take decisions which the voters will find to be credible. Very simple example. Imagine a tough decision that needs to be taken in the interests of the army at the expense of the interests of the civilian population. Of course, if former soldiers and officers will be the ones who will push the buttons for that decision, it will be easier for them to legitimize their choice, to explain why it matters, than for those MPs who have not served, who can be accused by politicians and part of the Ukrainian society for laying all the burden on their shoulders without making a sacrifice themselves. This is just an easy example, but the basic rule of democracy is that the parliament should represent the society as it is, not as it was. And our society has changed over the last 7 years, and it wants different forces and different personalities to be in the parliament. And we as a country need people who will assume new responsibilities and who will bring new energy into the system.
And if there is this scenario that Ukraine does not hold elections in 4 years, in 2 years, what does this mean, and what can happen, or what can trigger the elections?
There is a beautiful word in the world of physics and philosophy. It's called entropy. Entropy is the exhaustion of energy that leads to chaos. The system will simply begin to disintegrate. You will not be able to take the laws needed to make our country stronger. You will not have the government capable of taking decisions that make Ukraine stronger. This is what is going to happen. There is no other issue on which I desperately want to be wrong. But I think we should start thinking at least 2 steps ahead. Not what is going to happen tomorrow, but what is going to happen in 2 years' time. We can keep things as they are and wait until the situation deteriorates to the point when we will have to make critical choices. Or we can try to address issues in a planned and strategic manner.
Former Ukraine commander-in-chief and now ambassador to the UK, Valery Zaluzhnyi, in a recent rare interview said that back in 2022 his office was raided by the security service of Ukraine, and he also criticized President Zelensky for the failed counteroffensive. And your predecessor, former foreign minister Vadim Prystaiko, he was dismissed from the post of the ambassador to the UK, right after his comments, which many saw as criticism of Zelensky. Why do you think that in Zaluzhny's case, Zelensky did act differently? And what is your take on Zaluzhny's statements?
Frankly, I was not aware of that raid that Ambassador Zaluzhny referred to. So I learned about it from his interview. I don't recall it happening back then because I had my own business to mind in the foreign ministry. I think the difference is very simple. Zaluzhny is a political figure, and don't forget that it was not only Zelensky who offered Zaluzhny a job of ambassador. It was also Zaluzhny who accepted the job of ambassador. He was not forced into accepting that. So I guess from the political perspective, both men saw a value in making that deal happen.
And what is your reaction to his critics of Zelensky?
What can be there are plenty of critics of Zelensky. There are people who praise him, there are people who criticize him. What should my reaction be?
But it's untypical for diplomats to criticize.
But I tell you, what I just told you, that Zaluzhny is not a typical diplomat. Zaluzhny is a political appointee. And he decides what he wants to say, and President Zelensky decides how he wants to react to what General Ambassador Zaluzhny says. This is their personal relationship, and I think they are both adults who can handle it without our advices.
And after 4 years of the full-scale war, how do you view the state of Ukraine society? Is there still a will to keep fighting?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think the will to resist the Russian invasion is gone. I don't expect it to be broken. To be honest, I was very agitated in the course of the winter. I thought that we were on the brink of collapse as a society because of all these severe hardships we had to endure. But I believe God loves us because He helped us to go through it and once again prove the strengths of the Ukrainian society. I think it's actually our biggest advantage.
What do you think this year holds for Ukraine, and what might be the biggest test?
The biggest test will be weather in summer and then in winter, because peaking summer temperatures are as dangerous for the energy grid as freezing winter temperatures. So I guess there will be more attacks on Ukrainian energy grid somewhere in the middle of the summer. And then there will be another winter, which I do not expect to be a good one. And that 2026 will be another year Ukraine will have to survive.